last week, we talked about how we are all influencers for the next generation. That your influence can come in many forms. You could be a parent, an employer, a coworker, a friend, a relative, a neighbor, a stranger at a bus stop, although that's probably weird, or just those here in the church. And we want to focus on doing things that last beyond our years. And so we talked a little bit about our children last week. And this week, I get the joy of talking about our finances. It's always fun, right? So knowing that I don't have the best credibility when it comes to that, I sought an expert. So how many of you have heard of Dave Ramsey? Plenty of folks. That's good. Dave Ramsey, famous for limiting you to envelopes for fun, is a fantastic guy. If you're not familiar with him, he owns a company called Ramsey Solutions. Millions of folks have gone through Financial Peace University, which focuses on getting you out of debt and using money as a tool and not as something that holds you back. He has a syndicated radio show, and he's helped thousands of Americans get out of debt and manage their money using biblical principles. But not everyone knows Dave Ramsey's beginnings. When he was young, just out of college, he started selling and buying real estate, and he got rich. By the time he was 26 years old, he owned $4 million worth of real estate, which is a lot of money. But he borrowed too much, and he didn't know what he's doing. By his own admission, he was stupid and didn't realize that the borrower is slave to the lender. So his bank got sold to another bank, and they called on their notes, and they spent the next 2.5 years of their life losing everything. Everything they owned. They were sued, they were foreclosed on, the electricity got cut off, the water got cut off, his house was in foreclosure. So he had a brand new baby and a toddler and a marriage that is hanging on by a thread, because money fights are the leading cause of divorce in our country. And though they didn't get a divorce, he said, to quote him in this book, we didn't get a divorce, but sometimes we held on to each other just to get a better grip. And so he was 28 years old, scared completely out of his mind. And he remembers standing in the shower, and he had it as hot as he could stand. And he just stood there and cried because he didn't want his family to see him. And not knowing what to do, he got some advice. And in September of 1988, he filed for bankruptcy. That's the year his daughter Rachel was born, who co-wrote this book called Smart Money and Smart Kids. She was born in 1988, and people told her that she was born at the worst time in the history of the Ramsey family, but she sees it as the best time. This is a quote from the book. I literally had a front row seat of watching Dave and Sharon Ramsey not only figure out how to handle money, but God's ways of handling money. And because of that, I believe my life and my legacy have forever been changed. And that's what we're talking about, our legacy here, something that lives beyond our years. So if you've ever heard Dave Ramsey's radio show, he does this thing called the debt-free scream. And when the people have gone through either financial peace or just by listening to the radio show, they've gotten out of debt, they call up and they kind of share their story. And then at the end, he says, all right, 3, 2, 1, and they scream really loud. And if you have your radio loud, it's jarring. They go, I'm debt free, and you're like, oh gosh, and they're really excited. But what you can really hear in those moments, I think, is the chains dropping off, because there's a sense of freedom that comes from not owing anyone something or anyone anything. So you'll get like a 60-year-old woman who came in and paid off her house, or a single mom and her 15-year-old son who just became debt free. And from time to time, they have a family come in the studio. They drive from wherever they live to the studio because they want to thank Dave in person. And they put their radio headsets on, and they get on the call with Dave there. And they'll say things like, we took out an extra job and we worked nights to get our house paid off. And the mom will say, we didn't take our beach vacation that we've taken every year since we've been married so that we could pay off our cars. And then towards the end of the time, Dave will again say these magical words, count it down, let's hear your big debt-free scream. And these parents will kind of like gather their kids up, because this is the kids' only part in this thing, is they get to scream. And the parents have moved mountains and sacrificed and to change the lives of their family tree. And the dad gets to look at his kids, and he gets to say, are you ready? 3, 2, 1. And in unison, this family screams, we're debt-free. And you hear these little chickmunk voices in the background of these kids that are so excited. They probably don't even know what's going on. But from Dave's start of being a young family and filing for bankruptcy and really not having a lot of prospects, they could have built back into what they already knew and gone back into their old ways, but instead they chose to draw a line in the sand. They said, enough is enough. We're only going to do what Scripture says to do with our money. And because of that, their family has changed significantly. And because of his eventual influence in the Christian community, a lot of us and a lot of Christians, millions in fact, have been changed because he shared that with all of us. So the question is, how do we raise children in such a way that they become biblically wise, money smart adults? Say that again. How do we raise children in such a way that they become biblically wise, money smart adults? Andy Andrews says, we don't want to raise good kids. We want to raise kids in such a way that they become good adults because we want them to leave. And that was a slow burn. We do want them to leave. So how do we pull this off? How do you teach money-wise, biblically based concepts to kids? It's hard because the last thing kids want to talk about is how to manage money correctly. But there's a lot of things in this recipe for sure, and we're not going to be able to cover literally every part of it. But there are 3 things that I think we have to really get through to our kids to raise them that way, money-wise and biblically smart. And the number one thing is God owns it all. The first thing you teach them is God owns it all. Because the Bible says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Kids are precious. And we want to love them. We talked about last week, we want what's best for our kids. But we can't let the inmates run the asylum. So we teach them that God owns everything because what it does, it takes them off center stage. They start to learn humility when that happens. And when God owns it all, it turns out the axis of the world doesn't rotate on their little heads. And that's good. That's a good thing to figure out early. And it changes the way you handle money. When you understand that God owns it all, it changes the way you handle money. I know that I would handle money differently if I'm managing it for somebody that I adore, somebody that I worship. I'll handle it better for God than I would for me. And your kids are exactly the same way. And so we've got to do this in everyday life. I had a friend who's playing on the worship team with me, and he told me the story of his dad. His dad had built a business and many years put in hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, and built this business into a very successful business. And then he sold it. And then the next thing you know, he wasn't done working. He wanted to build something else. So he started a new business. And before you know it, he's got several employees, and this business is successful. And he told his dad, "We're doing pretty good, aren't we, Dad?" And his dad said, "I'm doing pretty good. You have nothing." And so you have to reinforce this idea of ownership the whole time you're dealing with kids. Because the biggest thing with kids, right, is whose is that? Is that mine? Mine is a word that comes from kids under 5 all the time, right? So if you teach them that God owns it all, it's going to help them on down the line. And the second thing you want to teach them is the value of work, the value of hard work. Proverbs 13:4 says, "Lazy people want much but get little, but those who work hard will prosper. The diligent will prosper." And so you want to teach your kids to work, not just work, but the idea that money comes from work. Money doesn't come from mom and dad's back pocket. So according to Rachel, Dave's daughter, growing up in the Ramsey house, they were never given an allowance. They were always on commission. So if you work, you get paid. You don't work, you don't get paid. Because they thought allowance is like saying to your children, you're a deficit. You can't do anything, so I have to help you. What they wanted to instill in their kids was the dignity to say, no, you can accomplish things. And then they attached money to that as well. And obviously the work is very age appropriate. When you tell a 4-year-old to clean their room, they're really not cleaning their room. They're picking up a couple of toys and sweeping things under the bed for sure. And then parents have to come in and fix that up. But then as they get older, that responsibility should increase when they get older. But when your kids make money, there's a couple of things that they can do with it. And it's something you can watch over and help them with. And the first thing they're going to want to do is spend it. That's right. My daughter, when she was young, she'd get like $5 for something, and she thought, I don't have to work for the rest of my life. $5. And then when she started to learn the cost of things, she learned that $5 is not very cool. But the kids want to spend it. In Proverbs 21:20, it says, in the house of the wise, there are stores of choice food and oil. A foolish man devours all he has. So wise people save. Foolish people spend everything they make. So teach your kids to save, as they can enjoy their monies too. It's always awesome when somebody saves up for something. I remember as a kid, I wanted a guitar. And my dad had been given a guitar, and he had told me that was his and it was not mine. And so I took it in my room, and it never went back in his room. And then I wanted an electric guitar. And so my dad bought me this awesome guitar from a guy at work. I think he probably spent $40 on it, but I thought it was really cool. I don't know why I painted it. I spray painted it bright yellow, like race car yellow. Guess I wasn't getting enough attention at the time. And then when I started to learn more about guitars, I wanted another guitar. And my dad said, well, you've been given two, so this next one's on you. And I remember having to save up money and putting the guitar on layaway, and then going to visit it at the store every couple of days. Because, is it still there? Can I play it for just a couple of minutes? And then when I got it, it's funny how I treated that guitar a little differently than the ones that I had been given. I didn't spray paint that one yellow. But I had to save up in order to get it, which meant I had to give up certain things, like hanging out at McDonald's after school with my friends. It was cool to hang out at McDonald's on the east side. It's not cool anymore. So along that same line, my friend Luke in high school, he had saved up money and bought a car. His brother Max, before him, had been given this Volvo. And he really kind of treated it almost like a dumpster. Like you could throw your trash in there, you could spill drinks in there. I think he smoked cigarettes in there, and so he didn't take care of it. And his brother Luke was a couple years younger than him, and he saved up the couple summers before he turned 16, and he bought himself a used car. And it wasn't the nicest car. It was like a 15-year-old Toyota, like 2-door. But every time I ever got in it, it was vacuumed, it was washed. We weren't allowed to have drinks or food in there. And he would inspect it after you got out to make sure you took everything and you didn't leave behind a mess. And meanwhile, Max had taken this Volvo and painted some roofs with that white roof coating. And then he put the bucket in the back seat, but didn't seal the top very well. So it spilled, and there was roof coating all over the back seat. And their even younger brother had dipped his finger in it, and on the back of the seat wrote, "Max sucks." So from then on, every time you got in the car, you just see "Max sucks" on the back of it. But Luke, because he saved up and he paid for it, he really did drive it differently than most 16-year-olds. And so you want to teach your kids to save. You also want to teach them to give. Because that's the first thing you want them to do. The first thing they want to do is spend. First thing you want to teach them is to give. Teach them to take some of the money that they've owned and give it away. In Genesis 1:27, it says, God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. So God is the biggest giver of all. And we're made in his image. So if he is a giver, we're created to be givers as well. And so when your kids, even as young as 5 or 6 years old, take some money that they've earned, not me slipping them $1 in the parking lot before church, and they give that away week after week, month after month, and year after year, their little hearts change, and they become more like Christ. And what I believe is they're living with this open hand mentality, and that's awesome. So teaching your kids the value of work, how to spend, save, and give gives them a solid foundation when they're adults. So, number one, God owns it all. Number 2, the value of work. The third thing we want to teach them is contentment is the antidote. We live in a crazy culture. I don't know if you've noticed. It's kind of crazy out there. And materialism is a big deal. Even amongst people as old as me. I'm not against nice things. The Bible and God is not against nice things, just against worshiping nice things. Having nice things is fine, but if you spend your life worshiping at the altar of them, you have a problem with contentment. In 1 Timothy 6:6, it says, "Yet true godliness with contentment is in itself great wealth." Contentment is an amazing thing. Content people, they don't always have the best things, but they always make the best of things. And so, how many of you have ever given a gift to a 3-year-old? All right. So, you give a gift to a 3-year-old, maybe you splurged a little bit. They're so excited when they open it, and they're pumped. And then you take it out of the box, and it's there, and 10 minutes later, they're playing with the box. And you're like, dude, what are you doing? And so you teach them materialism. You go over, no, not the box. Play with this nice, expensive thing. And you're playing with the wrong thing. Come over here, and so that's not what content people do. Content people, they make the best of every situation. There's a psychologist, Zig Ziglar, used to tell a story about the study of 2 boys. One was an optimist and one was a pessimist. And they built these 2 rooms with 1 glass wall facing the doctors. And they filled both the rooms with manure. And they stuck the boys in there for a few hours. And then they came back and they opened the door for the pessimist, and they said, he was crying, just crying uncontrollably. And they said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm crying. You put me in this room full of manure. What do you think I was going to do? Nothing good ever happens to me. And then they walk into the room with the optimist, and he's in the middle of the room in manure, just throwing it up in the air over and over. And they're like, what are you doing? And he says, with all this manure, there's got to be a horse in here somewhere. And so contentment changes your view of things. It's your perspective of things. I'm not positive how you can teach contentment, but I'm sure there's one element to it. And one element of content people is that they're grateful. Teach your children gratitude in order that they might become content. Gratitude starts with things like please and thank you and mean it. I think of gratitude, I think of, when Andy was up here thanking everybody. There's true gratitude. You can feel that in his voice. He really meant that. And that's awesome. Gratitude is a huge element of contentment. You're not grateful if you think things are due to you or if you feel entitled. Entitled people are the opposite. They're arrogant. There's an arrogance to entitlement. Like, I'm owed this because I'm walking the earth. And that sense of entitlement usually starts as we're kids. So how you can break that up by working with them and teaching humility as well. Humility will give you gratefulness because you feel like how can a kid from the dirty east side of Tucson who seems to mess up more than not ends up standing here in a room full of you wonderful people doing this? I'm amazed. Especially for, is Michelle here? Michelle went to high school with me. There's no way she thought I'd ever be doing this. There's natural gratitude that comes from humility, from realizing that your place on the planet and your place in the universe, that God is good and you are not. And it's hard to teach your kids that. And then you want to teach generosity. We'll come back to generosity, which we talked about earlier. That's the antidote for selfishness. Your child, when they learn to give, when they learn to put others first, it shifts that selfishness bug out of them. All of this mixed together with humility and gratitude, that creates contentment. But generosity is a huge part of that too. In the first grade, they sent my daughter home with a piece of homework that had random questions on it. and she'd have to answer them all. And it wasn't based on what they had been taught, it's just getting opinions. And one of them was, if you had $100, what would you do with it? And kids wrote things like, one kid wrote, I'll buy a small dollhouse. It's like very small. And then one kid's like, I'd buy a swimming pool and a diving board. Good luck with that. And then one kid wrote, I'd buy a gun. And I kept my eye on that kid because I just wasn't sure about him. And so I couldn't wait to get Amelia's answer because she was a funny kid. Just really, we spent a lot of her younger years laughing because she was just super funny. And so I actually have the document where she wrote, I'd get a house. So not the comedic answer I was looking for, but it let me know that I needed a teacher with the value of money. She was 5 years old, and she thought that $5 or $100 was going to buy her a house. But lower on that questionnaire was the comedy answer I was looking for. It said, on my birthday, I'd like to win, and then it had a blank. And Amelia wrote, I'd like to win 10 grand. And then when I asked her, how much money is 10 grand? She goes, I don't know. And we had no idea where she had heard the phrase 10 grand before. But in this book, Smart Money and Smart Kids, I guess they asked Dave's daughter the same question. And if I had $100, what would I do with it? And his daughter, who he thought was going to give the comedic answer, ended up writing, I'd give it to poor people. And he said they both just cried because they were not expecting that. She's 5 years old. She wrote, I'd give it to poor people. So if you teach your children contentment, teach them generosity as an element of contentment. Teach them that God owns it all. Teach them the value of work and that contentment is the antidote. I want to show you this video clip. It's of Dave's daughter, Rachel. And it talks a little bit about how they handle different responsibilities in the Ramsey household. It's about a 6-minute clip, so go ahead and roll.
You have to realize, parents, through most of parenting, but specifically with this money stuff, that more is caught than taught. Your kids are watching you. And I can remember sitting in my sister's hand-me-down dress, sitting in the pew in the church we grew up in a red velvet offering bag with 2 wooden handles on each side would get passed down our aisle, passed down the pew every Sunday. And I remember watching my dad, without fail, every Sunday, drop a folded check in that bag. And I'd see him drop a check in. And it wasn't this like lights flashing, hey kids, mom and dad are giving this week. I just saw it. That is how they lived out their lives. So parents, more is caught than taught. And as you're teaching your kids all of what we've talked about, this doesn't happen in just one big, money conversation or one weekend-long money summit that you think you're going to have with your kids. This happens in everyday teachable moments in the ebb and flow of life. And I believe handing them a little bit more of responsibility the older they get, so they feel the weight of their own money decisions. It kind of reminds me of the way mom and dad parented growing up. There's kind of 2 extremes of parenting sometimes. There's one side that says, well, let's just live in this little bubble. I don't want you to see the outside world. I don't want you to make any decision with your life because I don't want you to feel pain or harm, so we're going to just stay right here. And some of those kids are the ones that graduate high school and go off to college and go crazy. But they do that because they were never allowed to make any decision with their life. So when something came up, they made the wrong decision because their decision-making muscle was never built. But then you have the parents over here that say, fly, little 8-year-old, fly and be free. Just run around the restaurant screaming and banging your silverware. It's fine, don't worry, You're like, oh my gosh, please, parents, please discipline, right? So it's the 2 extremes, and mom and dad tried to find the middle ground. And they did this in one way through an analogy of a rope. So the idea of the rope was that we were tied to one end of the rope, and they had the other end. And depending upon how well we made decisions, how trustworthy we were, they would essentially let the rope out, and we'd have more and more freedom. But if we made a bad decision, they would pull the rope back in. I remember being in the 8th grade with some of my girlfriends, and we went to the movies. My mom dropped us off, and we decided not to see the movie, so we went across the street and got ice cream. She came back 2 hours later, couldn't find us. It was like this whole ordeal. We had a family meeting about it that night. And I remember Dad saying, Rachel, if you had called us on the payphone, because there weren't cell phones back then, right? If you had called us on the payphone, we probably would have let you go get ice cream, but you didn't. And you weren't where you said you were going to be. So now we can't trust you next time we drop you off. So we're going to have to pull the rope back in. But fast forward a few years, I was 15 years old at a high school party, and some adult beverages were being passed around. And I called my mom to have her come pick me up, and I got in the car, and she looked at me and she said, lots of rope, Rachel. You get lots of rope. Good decision, good choice. So when my older sister Denise is graduating from high school and going to college, she was the first one to leave home. And if you've had your first one leave, it's a big deal, right? A big deal. So Mom made this huge meal. We sat in the dining room table. We ate on the fancy plates that you only eat on, Thanksgiving and Christmas. We had cloth napkins. It was just this very nice dinner for Denise. And we all went around the table and we were telling stories and laughing and crying. It was like she was dying or something, but she wasn't. Just moving 2.5 hours away. But towards the end of that dinner, Dad brought out a gift bag, and he pulled this out of it, a rope. And he said to Denise, gave her kind of the sweet dad going away to college speech, and told her how proud he was of her and how, him and my mom, they're not worried about her going off to college because they've been handing her a little bit of rope at a time. And now what's left of that rope doesn't reach from Nashville, Tennessee to Knoxville, Tennessee. And so now her everyday decisions are now up to her. She has the rope. And he tied different ribbons around it, symbolizing different areas of her life. So white was her purity. Purple was her spiritual walk. Orange was because she was going to the University of Tennessee. Go Vols. Red was her academics. And yellow was if she ever needed to come home. And he said, Denise, this is your passage into adulthood. And he handed her the rope. And we all just cried. We're like, Denise has the rope and she's never coming home again. Everything's changing. Now, I'm the middle child of the Ramsey family, so the neglected and abused child, of course. So the night before I went to college, we had pizza on paper plates with paper napkins. And I was going to bed, and Dad was like, oh, Rachel, you need a rope, don't you? Went to the garage and handed me this. I'll let you decide which child is their favorites, but I think we all know. But I look at this rope, and I see this as really my legacy. I see this as a legacy of life. I had parents who were not perfect, but were intentional with us. And I believe they passed us on a legacy of life versus the legacy that could have been. In Deuteronomy, it says, I call heaven and earth as witness today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. So choose life that you and your descendants may live.
My favorite part of that clip is Dave Ramsey's in the corner not denying anything about the different ropes. So Dave was that dad. He was the dad that ruined their family's finances. But because Jesus intercepted his life and intercepted the life of his wife Sharon, they were completely transformed. And God does that because he's crazy about us. And he'll do that for every one of you because he's crazy about you. None of us are perfect parents, nor will we ever be, if you didn't know. The Ramseys weren't, but the fact that Jesus came to earth and died, paying our ultimate debt, the debt for our sins. We have this thing called grace. And grace means we get a chance to try again. A chance to do something that will last beyond our years because of grace. And their legacy has been completely changed. And ours can be too. I don't know about you, but I want to pass along rope to my daughter, not chains, and blessings rather than curses. So let's pray.